we continue with 365 prohibitions, negative commandments of the Torah. We're not going to get through three. I'm not going to do whatever I can. But we'll begin. Okay. Negative commandments, part 1. The first mitzvah of the negative commandments is not to consider the thought that there's another divinity aside from God. You shall have no other gods before me. Which, by the way, will be tomorrow's Chumash Rashi. Right? The 10 Commandments is tomorrow in the parsha. Right? So not to make an idol. So one second. Let's. So that's the second commandment of the first two commandments, right? And it's interesting what it says over here, not to consider the thought, right? So if the thought comes to you, don't consider it. In other words, it doesn't mean that the thought can't come up to your head. It just don't consider it. Push it out of your mind. Right? You shall have no other gods before me. Not to make an idol. Not to make one make for oneself, or have one made for oneself by others, as it says. Do not make an idol for yourselves. Okay? Not to make false gods even for others. Do not make molten gods for yourselves. That's from Leviticus. Not to make images for decoration even when one does not worship them. Do not make a representation of anything that is with me. Like, I don't know, with me. I don't know that term with me sounds a little. And with me, like me. Right. Not to bow down to false gods, even though they are not generally worshipped by bowing down before them. Do not bow down to them. And we'll see there's a prohibition of not serving an idol the way it's served. Like if Buddha is served in a certain way, don't serve it its way. But if Buddha is not served by bowing down, and you bow down to it, that's his prohibition. Because not all idolatry is served in the same way. Okay. Not to worship false gods with the types of service which they are customary to worship with. Oh, so like Baal, how did they serve the Baal? By excreting. Right? That's how they served it. So, unusual worship, but, do not serve them. Okay. Not to offer one son to Molech, not to give any of your children to offer to Molech. Molech was a certain kind of idolatry where there was certain initiation that was done to become part of, and so on and so forth. Not to do that. Not to perform deeds associated with oiv, as is, do not turn to oivais. Not to perform deeds associated with yaini. Not to turn to all these. The details will be when we learn these laws. Right now, he's just giving the. This is what he's going to explain in the next year. Will be all these negative commandments, yesterday's positive commandments, and give the parameters of the law. Right now, he's giving Yidayni's got to do with bones, and Oivai's got to do with I don't remember if that's crystal ball type of thing. Different types of idolatry. Not to take interest in the worship of false gods, and not turn to false gods. In other words, to take interest means over here, doesn't mean to adopt it, means even have any interest in it. Which is interesting, by the way. The sages knew everything about idolatry because they had to know the laws, the parameters. They had to know about the idolatry in order to be able to assess, is this idolatry or not? Right? So the sages have to know about this, but a regular person who's just like, going on YouTube and wants to know, interesting information about the different types of worship of different idolatries, that's not something to turn to. Do not erect a pillar for the purpose of worship. As is, do not erect a pillar for yourselves. Do not make a hewn stones upon which you prostrate oneself. You shall not place hewn stones. Do not plant a tree on the temple premises. It says, do not plant an Asherah or any other tree. Because, believe it or not, there was trees that were worshipped, right? I guess that's where the original tree huggers came from. And I don't know if that's today, those who are, you know, trying to save the planet, save all the trees in the planet, you know, don't cut down. Are they, is that called false gods? All right. Not to take an oath or on a false god is required on the one worshiper. So, for example, you cannot take a false would be to take a testimony in a court of law on the New Testament. That's false gods, right? Nor to have one of them take an oath on their false gods. And the name of the other gods you shall not mention, nor should it be heard from your mouth. Not to act as a missionary, a madiach, to persuade the Jews to worship false gods. Right? This is a very serious thing. Right? As it says, in the name of other gods shall not be heard from your mouth. Our sages thought that this is a prohibition against acting as a missionary for the worship of false gods. That's a very serious issue. Because it's not only you doing something wrong, but you're affecting other Jews following, you know, in such a false way. Not to act as a missionary. Oh, so we just did that. Not to act as a missionary misito. Oh, okay. That's the Hebrew. Persuade an individual Jews of worship false gods with regard to such missionaries, and you shall not continue to do so. So the previous one, madiach, is like to try to persuade a group. This one, mesis, is to even one individual. Not to show affection to a mesis, as the verse says, do not show appreciation for him. Right? Not to reduce one's hatred for a mesis, do not listen to him. Not to try to save a mesis, but rather to see to it that he is executed. Do not have mercy upon him. Right? This is very harsh consequence in these instances because you're turning away someone from the God of Israel. Right? Usually, when it would be someone in court and they have the death sentence, or they have they could get the death sentence for certain things. We try to not issue the death sentence, right? In other words, we're looking for reasons not to. Here, we're looking for reasons to. Why? Because this is, you know, for number 20, for a person whom a mesis tried to convince not to advance any arguments on behalf of the mesis, as to not have pity upon him. For the person whom the mesis tried to convince not to withhold any evidence he is aware of that would incriminate the mesis. Again, this mesis is a person who's individually trying to get one individual Jew away from the God of Israel, right? So he is aware that he would incriminate the mesis and not to try to cover up for him. So if you could testify, you have to come and testify. Don't cover up. Not to benefit from ornaments that have adorned false gods. Do not covet the gold and silver which is upon. So in other words, the ornaments is not the idolatry itself, but it's the ornaments of the idolatry. That too do not covet. Not to rebuild an apostate city to its former stature, since it should never rebuild. That's a city. This is talking about a city or a town or whatever. City and doesn't mean here 100,000 people. A city. I mean, obviously 100,000 people, yes, but a city here can mean a town of 200 people, or the like. So if the majority of that city will learn about this is involved in idolatry, then that city is actually destroyed. Actually, and you know what? I shouldn't have said a majority. It's for sure at least a majority. I think it's more than a majority. I don't remember now the amount. It could be just one. Yeah, I think it's one more than majority. Not to benefit property from an apostate city, as it says, nothing that has been condemned cling to your hands. Not to benefit from false gods, from any of their accessories. Again, this is not the idolatry itself, but the accessories that come with it. Anything offered to them, or any wine brought as a libation for them. Do not bring an abomination to your house. Not to prophecy in the name of false gods. As it says, the prophet who speaks in the name of gods shall die. Not to relate false prophecies. As it states, when the prophet presumptuously makes a declaration in my name, which I have not commanded him. Not to listen to someone who prophesies in the name of false gods. Not to listen to the words of the prophet. Right? Not to profane from executing a false prophet, nor to fear him. Do not fear him. And not to follow the laws and customs of worshippers of false gods. Do not follow the practices of the nation that I'm driving out before you. Whoa. So we did 30 of them, all about idolatry and various forms of that. Again, we're going to learn all of the details, the parameters of these laws, and what constitutes, something that is idolatry and the like. We'll learn that as we move forward. All right, folks. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Have an amazing
Thank you, Rabbi.